The life of a city is similar to that of humans. It's born, it grows, and most often it encounters setbacks. And these setbacks can be self-defeating obstacles, or they can serve as points of empowerment to define and recreate the future. In this segment of Frame, we're exploring the role of commercial architecture in the rebirth of a city, how historic and contemporary viewpoints blend to honor the past while laying the foundation for the future. Joining me in this discussion is OPN Architects Principal Dave Sorg. Dave, welcome to Frame. Thanks so much for being here.
It's my pleasure.
Appreciate you hosting us for this conversation. Since we both live in Cedar Rapids, which has been a great city since its inception in 1849, we both experienced that tragic event in 2008, and now we're looking at exciting developments now and in the future. And you're very much a part of that. So I thought we'd talk about the birth, a little bit of the growth that we're aware of, and then what's happening next.
Great.
Let's talk about what we know about the history of Cedar Rapids. I know it was established in 1849.
Sure.
And architecturally, what is your knowledge about the tone of the city and its design standards?
Sure. Well, I think when the railroads came in 1859, really reinforced Cedar Rapids as being one of the transportation and industrial hubs of our community. So there was tremendous growth along probably through the late 1800s with some of the large industry.
Yes.
And then First Street Southeast along the river became the warehouse district. And then in the 1920s, we started having a lot of buildings that were going vertical with Chicago-style architecture. Was the primary architecture of the city. Okay. And then in the 1950s, we moved into this period where we had wonderful theater, fantastic downtown shopping. And unfortunately, in 1979, when Westdale Mall came, it pulled major tenants like Montgomery Ward's and JCPenney's out of our downtown. When you talk about that rebirth and starting over again, it really had a significant impact on downtown. With the floods now happening, there's this amazing reinvestment happening downtown in our community.
Now, because of the flood, we have a lot of new architecture coming into the community. Yeah. Can you tell us about the new styles and some why, and show us examples, the whole nine? So
sure.
Let's start with, what do you know? What's coming in?
It's interesting when you look at the new styles, there are several factors that allow us and force us to design differently, and some of them are building codes, sustainability, and if you've heard of LEED, which is Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design, which is a point system to show how sustainable your building is. That which usually is founded on maximizing daylighting, large amounts of glass on the south side, which is controlled, north side glass, and then you minimize east and west glazing because that's where the harshest sun comes in.
Okay.
So when you take the LEED standards along with the codes, and then what the computer has allowed us to do, when you think about hand sketching, and I used to do all of our hand sketching about 20 years ago, and when I think about the renderings I could produce, which was one fixed image versus what you can do in a few short hours, and we can show some of that here coming up, but you can do amazingly complex buildings with facets and angles and curves and solids and voids that was very difficult to really study previously. Wow. So when you take that, then we can import our three-dimensional models and send them to our structural engineer, so they can then use these models to influence their structural engineering design. So it really allows for a far more collaborative process, but you can do far more daring and cutting-edge designs.
Sure.
And then from a materiality standpoint, typically you were using stone, brick, glass, some steel. Now there are all sorts of materials like terracotta, there are composite cement panels, there are composite metal panels, and so there's far more materials to use.
Wow. One model that we have in front of us is the Federal Courthouse.
Yep.
Do you want to start with that? Because that seems to be the beginning of the rebirth.
Yeah, the Federal Courthouse has been on our radar for almost 20 years now. Some of the federal judges have been working on it for that long. And OPN, we were retained in 2003, and we teamed with William Rahn Associates out of Boston to do this for the federal government. So it's a 120,000 square foot facility, and it's 8 stories. It has 5 courtrooms currently, with 1 in the future. And this project it's where it's being built is where it was intended to be, but when the flood occurred in 2008, it was in design, and we had about a year left in design. And at that time, we were maybe between 7th or 10th on the list to get funding. When the flood came, it flooded our current courthouse, so we went to emergency status, which put us on the top of the list. So we would not be looking at the courthouse today if it weren't for the flood. So that put us on the top of the list.
Wow.
Then the GSA, the government, which we're working for, called and said, wait a second, we have to move the building because we can't afford to have another flood.
Right.
And that's where we just said, time out, let us study this. How can we keep it downtown where it needs to be as something that can help generate, it's the first sign of real progress after the flood when they committed to staying downtown. So we looked at ways of raising the site up 1 foot above the actual flood and then use most of the ground floor for parking and some pedestrian space, including the security sequence.
Where was the beginning place for how you all envisioned this building?
Yeah.
Were there mandates from the government on what it should entail, lead design factors?
Absolutely.
Give us some insight. What insight that you're allowed to give?
Oh, of course. There are many design guides that we had to adhere to, more than we can probably have time to talk about. And then it was contractually, we have to design it to a LEED silver, and we're happy to say that it's on track for a LEED gold. When you think about conceptually, when you have a building that's this large and it does take up 2 blocks, we really had to spend a lot of time thinking about how does it enhance downtown rather than separate what happens on this side of 8th Avenue from what happens on others. We really didn't want this to divide downtown. So the 2-block building is predicated on a large atrium, which goes through it's a 6-story atrium through the center of the building. So when you drive down First Street, you actually see through the building and beyond to the south side of downtown. The building has a gentle curve to it, so it inflects towards the river and towards the other government Beaux-Arts building. And it culminates in what we call the prow, which is a 3-story glass element that when people, whether they're jurors on jury duty or they're people visiting a trial, they can go there and hang out on some benches and really get connected with the river. And just on my last view, there are amazing, not only views of the river, but the bald eagles when they're coming in and flying around. They came very close to the glass. The most critical idea about this courthouse is the idea of transparency. When you think about a historic courthouse, they're very solid, and it doesn't really feel like you have an understanding of the building. And we really wanted to focus on the transparency of the judicial process. So we have this very transparent facade. It's almost a football field of glass on the front. So it's about 300 by 100 foot of glass, and it's blast resistant on the front of the building. And we use low iron glass to make it very transparent.
Okay.
And it shows behind the glass wall is a stone wall, which each of the 5 courtrooms plus the 1 future reside in. So as you walk up to the building, you have an immediate understanding of how you would work through the building to get to the courtrooms.
Oh, that's interesting. Now I have a better understanding of how it fits into the overall landscape.
Yep.
And I see the detailing of how it's respecting historically some of the buildings surrounding it, but yet is very contemporary and moving us to the future. Is this the beginning of new architectural style that will appear throughout downtown?
Yeah, I believe so. I mean, very clean, modern lines. They're obviously not doing anything ornate. I would say the last maybe the only postmodern building we have, which was trying to take modern interpretations of historic styles, was the Cedar Rapids Museum of Art, which was done by Charles Moore in I believe it was in the late 80s or early 90s. And so right now it's just very, again, clean, modern, simple, very much trying to express what's happening on the inside of the building throughout. So when you look at this building, there's a very clear understanding of what's happening. And when you look on the left half of the building, which is the office side, so that's where U.S. trustees, U.S. attorneys, the district clerk of court, the bankruptcy clerks, they reside on this side. So you can see the window pattern is very different on that side of the building versus on this. And then when you go around to the 8th Avenue side, you'll see smaller windows, which are for the offices, and then you'll see dramatically oversized windows, which go into the courtrooms. And this is one of the very few courtrooms, courthouses with courtrooms around the country that have natural light. And they were able to do that because the judges all decided that they would have their chambers on 1 floor, which is on the 8th floor, the top floor, as they called collegial chambers, which free up space around the courtrooms allowing them to be on the outside wall and get the natural light. And it's incredible the difference between a typical courtroom without light versus the courtrooms they have
Oh, I
here.
can only imagine. What is the hope for the revitalization of downtown when all these buildings go online?
Well, I think when you look back at the 50s and you see photos, it's really amazing when you think of all the people that were downtown, walking the streets every day, even on weekends. So there's been a nice move towards getting some downtown housing with Water Tower and Bottle Works, and hopefully we can continue to get more of that. But when you think about the ACE district, which is called the Arts, Cultural, and Entertainment District, and that's taking 3rd Street Southeast from 1st Avenue, the event center, to 4th Avenue, taking that from 4 lanes down to 2. So people, really the pedestrian level activity can overtake the vehicular. So it becomes a people street. And if you have the wider sidewalks, you can get outdoor seating. So Zinn's and John Bay's and other Deb's Ice Cream. Just picture this walkway with trees and landscaping, planters, hopefully special signage, and then all of this outdoor seating. It really can become an amazing space. And when you think about the hundreds of thousands of visitors coming to the event center, they need to be able to look out and say, this is where I want to go. I'm not going to get in my car and drive somewhere. I'm going to come to this street. And then once they're on 3rd Street, then they would filter into the other streets. So we're trying to just bring this back to more of a human people scale street, add bike lanes rather than these large 4-lane streets that are basically encouraging people to drive and just drive right out of our downtown.
That's really, really true. And are there cities that the community is looking to emulate to bring that area to life and bring that robust energy back?
Yeah, there are several cities that we've looked at. 16th Street in Denver, Colorado was one example. Greensburg, South Carolina is an example that we looked at, which, you know, one thing they say is it takes 10 or 20 years to really make this change. But one thing that's interesting about Cedar Rapids is when you look at next year, I think every building that I mentioned will be done and complete. So 5 short years after the flood, there will be just significant amount of revitalization occurring. So we're very excited about the future, and I think that when these buildings are complete and if we can pull off ACE District and really activate our downtown again.
That's tremendous. Will Cedar Rapids become sort of a model for the rest of the country to follow after a natural disaster? Because that's very quick turnaround, if you will.
We were thinking about, can we even have this open house for the entire community, say 5 years on the exact day of the flood? Because when to that point, if it's the 5th worst natural disaster in our country's history, and to think of what we've done in 5 short years, there are other examples that we've used and said, hey, if we can just be done in 10 years like this community, and to do it in half that amount of time is really amazing. And then when you think about the amphitheater across the river, and then Nubo City Market, and all of these other things with what's happened in the medical district, there really is a tremendous amount that we should be proud of in our community. And this was done through federal, state, and private dollars. So everyone pitched in to help make this happen.
Dave, thank you so much for hosting us and taking us on this journey and educating us on what's happening next. It's very exciting and uplifting to see how the setback from 2008 did not define our city, and actually I think it propelled us into the future a little faster.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, I think a year and a half from now, a year and 3 months from now, I'll be happy to take you around the various projects in our community, because both on a professional and personal level, I'm just thrilled to see what we've been able to do both on a private and public level, and working together to see this reinvestment and this rebirth happening.
To just recap and plant the seeds for what's happening in the next year to year and change, we'll see the Federal Courthouse live online.
Yeah, that will be this summer and opening in probably the fall. November will be the first court session. The event center.
Yes, and that whole event center, convention, hotel, and then a childhood favorite of mine, the Paramount.
Absolutely.
Is next year.
That's actually this fall.
This fall. Yes. All right. And what else? We have the library, of course.
And that'll be spring, summer of 2013.
And then the Economic Alliance will go into the old Science Center.
That's correct. There's also the amphitheater, the Nubo City Market, what's happening with the Mercy Cancer Center and the new PCI
Yes.
building. So the medical mall is starting to take place.
Everything is shaping up beautifully.
Yes.
Thank you so much for your contributions, and
You're
thank you
welcome.
for helping us understand how a city can definitely rebuild and move on to the next cycle of life.
Absolutely, it's my pleasure.
Thanks so much.
You're welcome.
And thank you for tuning in. Frame is sponsored by Allegra, Click Marketing Solutions, OPN Architects, Style Folio Jewelry,